All right. Hey, we don't do a cold open here, Andy. You want to hit the theme video, please?
One of the most urgent tasks of our country is to decisively defeat the climate hysteria hoax.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday. It is the best day of the week, and it's not just because the weekend is almost here. It is because this is the day the Heartland Institute broadcasts the Climate Realism Show. I am your host, Jim Lakely. I'm the vice president of the Heartland Institute, which is an organization that has been around for 40 years and has been known as the leading global think tank pushing back on climate alarmism. Heartland and this show bring you the data, the science, the facts, the truth to counter the climate alarmist narrative you've been fed every single day of your life. There is nothing else quite like the Climate Realism Show streaming anywhere. So I hope you will bring friends to view this live stream every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And also like, share, and subscribe. And be sure to leave comments underneath the video. All of these very easy actions convince YouTube's mysterious algorithm to smile upon this program and get the show in front of even more people. And as a reminder, because big tech and the legacy media do not really approve of the way that we cover climate and energy on this program, Heartland's YouTube channel has been demonetized. So if you want to support this program, and I really hope you do, please visit heartland.org/TCRS. That's heartland.org/TCRS. And you can join other friends of this program who kick a little bit into the tip jar and help bring the show to the world every single week. Any support you can give us is warmly welcome and greatly appreciated. We also want to thank our streaming partners, junkscience.com, CFACT, What's Up With That, the CO2 Coalition, and Heartland UK Europe. I hope you will find and follow all of these accounts on all of your favorite social media and video outlets. And so we have a big show and a very special guest, so let's get started. Today we have with us, as usual, Anthony Watts. He's the senior fellow and at the Heartland Institute and the publisher of the world's most viewed website on climate change. What's Up With That? We have Sterling Burnett, Sterling Burnett, who is the director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center on Climate Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute. We have Linnea Lukin. She's a research fellow at the Heartland Institute and the star of Heartland's Climate at a Glance video series. And also, of course, we have producer Andy Singer behind the curtain, making sure the show flows well. But we also are very happy to welcome today a very special guest. It's her third time on our program. We are so honored. And that is Dr. Judith Curry. Judy is the president of Climate Forecast Applications Network, also known as CFAN. She's the former chair of the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at Georgia Tech. And as I mentioned, she's been a previous guest on this program, and she's also presented at one of Heartland's international conferences on climate change. Welcome back, Judy. This is such an honor, and we have so many important things to talk about, including you kind of got in the news this week.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Yes, we'll be talking about that very shortly. The new climate assessment, I've described it as one of the only climate assessments I've seen from the government that is worth reading because it's based on science and not a political agenda. So we will get into the details of that very soon. But first, as we like to do on this program, we like to have a little fun and we like to cover some of the crazy climate news of the week. Hit it, Andy. Thank you very much, Bill Nye. So, big news, everybody. Captain Planet returns, or he's going to return soon, it seems. You may remember Captain Planet from the 90s. This is a story from Deadline. Captain Planet live-action series is in the works at Netflix. This exclusive story from them, I'll read a little bit from it. Captain Planet and the Planeteers' long-awaited live-action adaptation is getting a big boost and a major twist. In a competitive situation, Netflix has landed for development Captain Planet, a live-action series based on the cult animated show Deadline has learned. It hails from Greg Berlanti's Berlanti Productions, Leo DiCaprio's Appian Way, and Warner Brothers Television. Tara Hernandez will be writing the adaptation of the 1990 environmental superhero animated series Captain Planet and the Planeteers, which ran on TBS and syndication in syndication for 6 seasons. By the way, Appian Way previously spearheaded a live-action feature, Captain Planet Take, by which they mean they tried to make a movie and they abandoned it. But the entire superhero was conceived by that environmentalist, Ted Turner, and it follows 5 teenagers who tackle environmental disasters with the help of a superhero, Captain Planet. So, Andy, we have a clip. I have a clip here from Captain Planet that actually exposes that the show aimed at children was, at times pretty dark.
Go Planet!
Did you know the population of the world is now more than 5 billion?
Wow, that is a lot of people.
And it's increasing by 90 million people each year.
But the Earth is not getting any bigger.
So when it is your turn to have a family,
keep it small. The more people there are, the more pressure we put on our planet. So take it easy on our Earth and conserve what you can.
Yeah, Captain Planet telling kids to have small families, I guess if they have any kids at all. By the way, the Earth now has, I think, about 3.5 billion more people than when that clip was created. Linnea, I want to start with you. You were a kid when this was out, I think. You may have seen it. And it seems that not only is Hollywood out of ideas with nothing but reboots and sequels and prequels to existing properties, but it seems even climate alarmists are out of ideas when it comes to kiddie climate propaganda.
Yeah, well, I guess it wasn't subtle enough when they were putting it into, every single cartoon out there. Yeah, they are really scraping the bottom of the barrel. I wish they would spend their money if they're going to reboot something from that era. I wish that they would take another look at like Animorphs or something instead. Something that the kids really want. They don't care about Captain Planet. No one's going to watch a Captain Planet live action, and especially not one that's, I don't know. Well, I will give it this. We are going to have a lot of stuff to talk about on this show, or maybe on In the Tank when that comes out. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of cringe for us to go over. So I'm looking forward to that.
Producing fodder for us. That's their goal. Disney has already attempted to ruin classics like Snow White with a live action, and The Little Mermaid with a live action, and various other of their wonderful cartoons, many of them moral tales, with these live action woke adaptations. But Captain Planet started woke. If they're going to bring something back, I wish they'd go back a little bit farther and bring back Johnny Quest, which was people adventuring and going out and doing things and being exciting about discovery, not doomsaying about the planet because there are people on it.
Johnny
They
Quest
would not do that though, because they won't bring back Johnny Quest.
What's that?
I was just going to say Johnny Quest was very problematic for a lot of reasons that we don't need to get into on this program. So go ahead, Anthony.
It's very politically incorrect, and as strong as it is in my memory, I thought it was this amazing cartoon when I was a kid. It only ran 1 season. I thought it ran forever. But it turns out it only ran 1 season.
Anthony, do you have one quick comment before we move on?
I was just saying they would not bring back Johnny Quest because all of the left would view Haji as racist, and therefore, because he was in a menial role, and so they would.
You're right.
That was not acceptable.
You're right.
Yep. All right. Let's move on to our second item, which is a little bit more substantive, but we will keep an eye on Captain Planet. As Linnea says, it's probably going to be a cringe fest, and we'll enjoy it. This is Donald Trump blows wind away. This would be in the good crazy climate news category. This is from the Business Times. Trump yanks millions of hectares of ocean designated for wind power. The Interior Department's Bureau of Ocean Energy Management announced on Wednesday that it was rescinding huge swaths of ocean in the U.S. outer continental shelf, initially set aside for the fast tracking of offshore wind projects by the administration of former President Barack Obama, and then expanded by former President Joe Biden. The move applies to more than 1.4 million hectares of federal waters across the Gulf of America, Gulf of Maine, the New York Bight, California, Oregon, and the Central Atlantic. A day earlier, the Interior Department said that it was considering halting all wind development on federal lands and in federal waters amid a broader review of the energy source derided by U.S. President Donald Trump as unreliable. Since Trump's reelection, Bloomberg NEF's forecast for new offshore wind developments has fallen by 56%. Now, I want to play this clip of Trump dumping on wind power in front of no less than Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission. What Donald Trump said probably made her ears bleed and her teeth hurt. So let's play that clip, please, Andy.
And the other thing I say to Europe, we will not allow a windmill to be built in the United States. They're killing us. They're killing the beauty of our scenery, our valleys, our beautiful plains. And I'm not talking about airplanes. I'm talking about beautiful plains, beautiful areas in the United States. And you look up and you see windmills all over the place. It's a horrible thing. It's the most expensive form of energy. It's no good. They're made in China. Almost all of them. When they start to rust and rot in 8 years, you can't really turn them off. You can't bury them. They won't let you bury the propellers, the props, because there's a certain type of fiber that doesn't go well with the land. That's what they say. The environmentalists say you can't bury them. The whole thing is a con job. It's very expensive. And in all fairness, Germany tried it, and wind doesn't work. You need subsidy for wind, and energy should not need subsidy. With energy, you make money. You don't lose money. But more important than that is it ruins the landscape. It kills the birds. They're noisy. You have a certain place in the Massachusetts area that over the last 20 years had 1 or 2 whales wash ashore, and over the last short period of time, they had 18. Okay? Because it's driving them loco. It's driving them crazy. Now, windmills will not come. It's not going to happen in the United States. People ought to know that these windmills are very destructive. They're environmentally unsound, just the exact opposite. Because the environmentalists, they're not really environmentalists. They're political hacks. These are people that they almost want to harm the country. But you look at these beautiful landscapes all over the world. Many countries have gotten smart. They will not allow it. They will not. It's the worst form of energy, the most expensive form of energy. But windmills should not be allowed. Okay.
So Sterling, I know the Heartland Institute's worked on stopping some wind projects in the Atlantic. But can you actually believe that these words are coming out of the mouth of an American president, and it's backed up by real policy decisions and victories?
It's. I haven't gotten tired of winning yet. I can imagine someday, many years in the future, that I might, but I'm not there yet. President Trump, he gets it. Anyone who drives by these places, these industrial wind facilities, should get it. I won't say that they aren't engineering marvels. They're very interesting engineering marvels. But what I don't want is high-tech engineering, as he said, in the mountains, in the plains, on the oceans, blocking my view shed, killing wildlife. No other industry could get away with slaughtering wildlife the way the wind and solar energy industries do. Dozens of raptors, protected birds killed every year. Exxon kills one with an oil spill. It's got to be shut down, billions of dollars in cost. Oh, they grant these wind facilities the right to kill 30 bald eagles that just came off the endangered species list not a decade ago. You can kill 30 a year at each one of these things, right? Golden eagles, also protected, kill them. No industry is so coddled, is so subsidized, and is so destructive. You know, when you talk about both environmentally destructive, but also sort of morally destructive. We should not be supporting industries that depend fundamentally on child and slave labor. At one time, the Democrats would have been all over this. This would have been their core issue, human rights. We can't exploit the children in the Congo and the slaves in China, the political prisoners being exploited. Now there's like, oh no, let's just ignore the man behind the curtain. We've got to have these things. So we're going to put up with a lot of death, slavery, and destruction of kids. It's awful.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. I don't have much to say about it other than the fact that, yeah, windmills are bad. Their carbon footprint before they're made is humongous, you know, gathering all the materials. And then when they're made and they're transported, the carbon footprint goes higher and higher. And then they only have a short life. They shake themselves to death. You know, we've seen videos of windmills self-destructing. We've seen windmills where the blades have shredded and fallen off. We've seen windmills where the blades have delaminated and all these fiberglass pieces have dropped into the ocean and messed up beaches. You know, nuclear is really the only way forward as far as I'm concerned. And even better than that, thorium is the right way forward for nuclear because it has none of the drawbacks of the stuff that they use now with, you know, plutonium or uranium as far as toxic byproducts and so forth.
Well, it was Jim. It was an interesting thing to watch. Not just that interview. He was sitting there with Starmer, and Trump goes on his spiel. You know, nobody describes these things like Trump does. He just gets straight to the point. Hammers it in several times. It's really, really funny to watch. And he's just trashing wind turbines and the solar left and right. And then it's Starmer's turn to speak. And he's like, well, we believe in all of the above. and it was just such a pale, frail little reply after Trump's whole spiel that it was very funny to watch.
Starmers, we believe in killing the whales and polluting the Scottish Highlands with plastic waste from these turbines and putting out CO2 with the concrete bases we have to sink. That's all the above.
Yeah. Well, look, we you know, when you can get a European leader to move away from all fossil fuels must stay in the ground and we need to get off them to all of the above, I consider that progress. That's not bad. Judy, do you have anything you want to share on wind power? I know that's not really your area of expertise, but you know, it is the reason we're supposed to all go to wind and solar is because fossil fuels are causing a climate crisis.
No, it's just a very ill-conceived idea. You've covered it really well, and there are much better options. And the issue is, apart from environmental issues, they're not good for the grid. Everyone talks about intermittency, and you need battery backup and all this kind of thing. But the bigger issue is the asynchronicity and the lack of frequency control. You need to keep these things spinning. I mean, if you lose frequency control, the whole thing crashes. And by adding more and more wind and solar and even batteries, this is all makes the asynchronicity problem even worse. So it's just such a a bad solution, independent of cost, independent of environmental impacts. It's just a bad solution.
Yeah, well stated. All right, let's move on to another item. It's not in the sidebar on the side, but Sterling Burnett requested this special this morning, so we're going to cover it anyway. I would have headlined it, tick, 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 boom. And this is a story from our friends at Climate Depot via National Review. Headline is, not parody, beneficial blood sucking. Bioethicists want ticks to infect people to stop them from eating meat. Now, this is a paper apparently in the latest edition of the journal Bioethics, and two bioethicists have argued in that prestigious journal that we should breed ticks to cause more infections of a condition that causes an allergy to red meat. I'll read a little bit from the author's own paper. Quote, our main conclusion is that we should promote a particular tick-borne syndrome, alpha-gal syndrome, AGS. AGS is caused by the allergen alpha-gal, which in humans causes an allergic reaction to eating mammalian meat and mammalian organs. People who have the allergy may have a variety of symptoms, including hives, gastrointestinal upset, meaning vomiting and diarrhea, or anaphylaxis in severe cases. Often these symptoms present 2 to 6 hours after ingestion of mammalian meat. However, there is little reason to believe that there are additional harms associated with the allergy, set aside from the allergic reaction itself. They wrap up here. We have argued that AGS is a moral bioenhancer and that its promotion is morally obligatory. Among other things, that means that researchers have an obligation to develop the AGS carrying capacity of ticks. And that means human agents are obligated to expose others to AGS, not to prevent the spread of AGS or Lone Star ticks, and in addition to all of this, to undermine any attempts to cure AGS. Sterling, you're the one who requested this, and you live in Texas, where meat eating is mandatory and veganism is grounds for deportation, so I think you need to start us off.
Well, and the ticks are called Lone Star ticks, and we are the Lone Star state. It takes a philosopher, and I say this as a trained ethicist myself. That's my PhD. It takes a philosopher to come up with some stupid stuff like this, and a misanthropic philosopher, someone who they have a moral point of view, or they think it's a moral point of view. They frame it as conditionals. They say if meat eating is morally wrong, then it's morally right to push, if then. But the problem comes in two parts. First, intentionally doing something that harms human beings and promoting parasites on human beings, that's morally wrong regardless. And especially when one of the symptoms could be anaphylactic shock. No small thing there, because everyone carries around an EpiPen. But also the premise that that they know they have the moral point of view, meat eating is wrong. Mammalian meat eating is wrong. I guess birds and fish don't count. That's just a debatable moral point of view in the realm of bioethics. No one, if there is an environmental group, let's say there's a group that calls itself Extinction Rebellion, imagine that. And they go out and say, gosh, what we need to do now is disrupt any efforts to prevent this disease and to wipe out these ticks through force. They should be locked up as terrorists. And honestly, I think the bioethicists are putting forward a terroristic philosophy. I mean, they are providing the intellectual justification for a type of terrorism.
Anthony, I know you want to get in here.
Yeah, I have observed through my many, many years of being in the climate wars that the biologists are the absolute worst of the nutcases out there. I'm serious. I am, because they don't understand the physical world. And they get so wrapped up in their life studies, studying some germ or some, parasite like ticks or whatever, that they relate to those things more than they relate to people. And as a result, people are kind of an annoyance to them in terms of what they view the world should be. And so these bioethicists, and I would point out, where's the ethics in these bioethicists? There is none, are making these crazy ideas. Speaking of crazy ideas, earlier we had the return of Captain Planet, right? To push, population reduction. Well, it looks to me like maybe these guys, if they're really super smart, would go get and reboot that superhero, The Tick.
There you go.
And use that. I mean, goodness. I've never
That's
in
a
all
tick
my
I can
time.
get behind.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
This is, of course. Sorry, Anthony.
That's okay. In all my time being in this debate, I have never seen anything as stupid and as evil as this thing. I mean, it is just beyond the pale.
I was going to say that this is, of course, a good reason to be as nice as you can within reason to your local possum population. Possums eat hundreds and hundreds of ticks every single day. So get those little suckers rolling on this issue. And yeah, because I have a friend who actually got this disease from a tick bite, who works in parks, he's like a park ranger. And yeah, apparently it's not permanent, but it fades away over time, the disease. Like it's not always like forever, but it is very, very irritating. But it's so weird too, because it's just mammals. It's like the weirdest disease. You can eat chicken and stuff. You just, yeah, it's so strange. It's like, I don't know. I'm willing to put a tinfoil hat on for this particular one because it's very, very odd.
We can solve the fading away crisis with a booster tick bite every little bit of time.
Well, I mean, again, this is a moral imperative according to these researchers, because again, the idea that raising cattle is super harmful to the environment because it, methane emissions and all of that stuff, and there just seems to be no end, no limit to a crazy idea that can be attributed to saving the planet from human activity. So, including actually actively trying to give people diseases. I mean, that's just ethically horrible. But what do you know? All right, let's move on. This is a big reason why we have Dr. Judith Curry on the show today, and this is the Climate Working Group Rocks. I encourage all of the people listening and watching this podcast today to go to judithcurry.com, where you can see her own summary and assessment of something pretty remarkable that happened this week. So the Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, he commissioned a report titled "A Critical Review of Impacts of Greenhouse Gas Emissions on the U.S. Climate." It was authored by a entity calling itself, or I guess called by Secretary Wright, the Climate Working Group, which consisted of John Christie, Roy Spencer, Steve Koonin, Ross McKittrick, and one Judith Curry. From the Secretary Wright's foreword, I think this is a good description of the effort here. The Secretary wrote, "What I found is that media coverage often distorts the science. Many people, even well-meaning ones, walk away with a view of climate change that is exaggerated or incomplete. To provide clarity, I asked a diverse team of independent experts to summarize the current state of climate science with a focus on how it relates to the United States. To correct course, we need open, respectful, and informed debate. That is why I am inviting public comment on this report. Honest scrutiny and scientific transparency should be at the heart of our policymaking. To provide clarity, I asked a diverse team of independent experts to summarize the current state of climate science with a focus on how it relates to the United States. I did not select these authors because we always agree, far from it. In fact, they may not always agree with each other, but I chose them for their rigor, honesty, and willingness to elevate the debate. I exerted no control over their conclusions. What you'll read are their words drawn from the best available data and scientific assessments." So, Dr. Judith Curry, can you walk us through how this even happened, how you and your colleagues were selected, and how you worked together, and what you found and wrote into this report?
Well, I guess all this started happening at the end of March. My understanding is that Secretary Wright contacted Roy Spencer. Apparently he had read his book and was discussing about this. And he presented, his idea for this to Roy, and Roy suggested, a few other people. And Secretary Wright, he said, well, yeah, those are the same people I had on my list. And we were subsequently invited to join this group. I mean, we each had 1 or 2 individual phone calls from the secretary, but we never received a formal charge as to what this was supposed to be. We were just sort of, we were assigned a temporary staffer from DOE to help shepherd this along, but we were really left on our own. And it wasn't until like mid-May or so when we saw the secretary's forward, that Jim just read, that we really had, well, what is the secretary thinking along these lines? So we were given, free rein with no guidance at all. Even, we had to, flap our wings a bit and try to figure out, what is this supposed to be? What would she, what should this look like? How are we going to approach it? So it took us a while to get our bearings, but, we had a short time frame, and, so we all, had to put in a lot of hours to get this done. We never met personally. I mean, Roy and John Christie are, work together, but the rest of it, I didn't see any of the team members during this period. A lot of emails, a lot of Zoom calls, and we managed to pull this together. And apart from the short time horizon and the small number of authors, I think it's a pretty remarkable document. So, I'm pretty happy with it. So that's how it happened. I would have, in our instructions, we were sort of aware that the EPA was interested in our report. We were not, instructed in any way to deal with endangerment finding related issues. We figured these were on the table, but we didn't focus on that at all. I would have preferred to have, the report has been finished for about a month. I would have preferred to have it released earlier, but they released it concurrently with the EPA related documents. So, I mean, that's the backstory on it. And, some of the team members had collaborated with each other, but I had never collaborated with any of these individuals. And I've only met each of them, a few times. So, I wasn't entirely sure what I was getting myself in for, but I think it went surprisingly well. And I'm very pleased with the document. And I want to emphasize that we want to stimulate dialogue and debate and discussion, no more consensus enforcement. This is a deeply complex issue. There's disagreement, there's lots of uncertainty. We need to get these things on the table and sort through the issues. And, it's once you get rid of the, and the issue is atmospheric scientists, climate scientists, whatever you call them, tend to have a very, maybe not meteorologists, but the so-called climate scientists tend to have a very naive notion of risk. The precautionary principle, well, this could happen through some sort of scenario, we need to get rid of it, especially if it ties in with our personal environmental values or other ethics. And so that they think that they can't really separate the science from their own moral and political opinions and their notion of risk. Uncertainty increases the urgency for action, all these kind of things. It's just like, and I've been in discussion with some scientists, even on a listserv, and these are big names that you would recognize, and their notions of risk are so utterly naive. and risk management. I said, oh, geez, no wonder we're in this kind of position when, even, so-called best scientists, or at least the ones with the greatest amount of recognition, are in this particular rut. I'll bring this up because this is something that I was reading today, and it really struck me that there's an article in the Wall Street Journal called "The Rise of the Climate Right." And they really talk about right-wing climate science versus left-wing climate science. And this really struck home because the so-called right-wing is very much tied towards observations. Okay, and the risk perception is well, it's better to, promote prosperity and energy abundance and then build resilience. Okay, and then left-wing climate science, if you will, is more the climate models. All we need to do is, analyze the output of climate models. Unfortunately, in this dichotomy, is theory, and I mainly, have a theoretical perspective, and I think that needs to anchor everything. But if you have to argue between the so-called extreme left and the extreme right wing climate science, that the right wing has the epistemic high ground because the observations are much more credible than the models. So, this is like a very cool article, and it's food for thought.
Yeah, Kimberly Strassel is excellent on this topic and has been for many years. I do encourage our viewers and listeners to go to judithcurry.com where you can see her own blog post on this. But I also wanted to bring up, as you mentioned, Roy Spencer was a big part of this. He's also a friend of the show and a friend of the Heartland Institute, and has presented at many of our climate conferences. And he has a blog post up here about this, up on his site about this. And he said that, among other things, the report presents evidence supporting the view that, 1, long-term warming has been weaker than expected. 2, it's not even known how much of that warming is due to human greenhouse gas emissions. 3, there are good reasons to believe the warming and increasing CO2 effects on agriculture have so far been more beneficial than harmful to humanity. 4, there have been no long-term changes in severe weather events that can be tied to human greenhouse gas emissions. And then 5, the few dozen climate models now being used to inform policymakers regarding energy policy are not fit for purpose. I imagine you wouldn't argue so much with Roy's assessment there. And if you want to elaborate on those findings and others that came through this process.
Those are the high points. Those are some high points. The things that I really cottoned on to more were related to the extreme. The things that I think are the best in the report really relate to extreme weather in the U.S. John Christie in particular, but also with McKittrick and Spencer. And have curated all of these observations and cleaned up the data, and they present a really good analysis of temperature and precipitation related metrics over the last 120 years or so. And I think that presents a really important perspective. The other chapter that I think is particularly significant is related to attribution. Not just global, the attribution of global warming, but also decadal scale issues like the recent drop in planetary albedo, but also impact drivers and individual extreme weather events. I think the report sort of lays all that out in terms of, what the limitations of the approaches are. And this includes a section that Ross McKittrick wrote on the statistical analysis methods that Ross regards as them to be, that most people use to be deeply flawed in these attribution analyses. So I think that's a particularly significant chapter. The other one that I really liked is the chapter 11 on economics and the social cost of carbon. I think that, is a high level synthesis and a unique perspective that you don't easily get reading anything else that I've been able to read. So I particularly like that chapter. But it makes a lot of the important basic points, that Roy summarized. So that there's a lot of, I think pretty much anybody reading that report would come away learning something, no matter, I think there's a lot of really good stuff in there. The report was subject to an internal review from DOE, which included 5 scientists from the labs. These scientists were a little bit more heavily biased in the direction of ag and land and forests and everything. So we didn't have, a lot of what I would call climate physics kind of people reviewing it. But the comments were, pretty interesting. There were some tough reviews and we did make some changes, but at the end of the day, the main points, the main arguments, I think stood up very well to some pretty tough reviews. And that was like the first step. The secretary wants to have, and so do the authors, wants to have a very rigorous public review. And if teams of scientists choose to review it, or I don't know if they're going to have like a National Academy review or anything like that. I don't know. But there's very open to having people review this. And I think there's like a 30-day window for public comments, and the group will, respond to them and change the report as appropriate. Mm-hmm. So, this is, very open process, very transparent process. And, we're spending a lot of time responding to the reviews. On my to-do list for this weekend is to go through and finalize the formal response to the DOE reviews, tell them what we changed, and provide counter arguments for things that we didn't change. I mean, that's on my plate to finish that up this weekend. But it's something that we take the review process very seriously. I regard this as a learning process for everybody, to consider different perspectives and to see what's out there. I mean, there's a number of issues that we raised in the report that are given very short shrift in the IPCC and the National Climate Assessment. That these things should be addressed. I mean, global greening, when you ever see that talked about, and some of these, the albedo issue, the planetary albedo issue, you don't see that one addressed. And the thing that I thought was particularly important in Chapter 6 on extreme weather events is the most recent National Climate Assessment looked at data like since the 1950s or the 1970s. And if you go back to the first half of the 20th century, you see a lot of really extreme weather events that the National Climate Assessment just completely ignored. So they could claim that they're getting worse and attribute it to, fossil fueled warming. So it's, people need to open up their minds, that they've been, they had the upper hand and, the consensus rules and, their professional reputations and the go-to media superstars, they were really entrenched in those positions, and they're playing power politics with their science. They're not really contributing to the, overall assessment of this risk. They're just playing power politics with their science. And now the tables have been turned to where we have a group of scientists that are very much data driven and, are taking a hard look at the data. And, it just doesn't, and a hard look at the models and how they compare with the data. And the whole narrative doesn't hold up too well. Okay, so there's a lot of uncertainties. And this whole game that people play with extreme weather events and attributing every extreme weather event to fossil fueled warming is, just a joke. I'm hoping this report, it debunks that. But we need.
Dr. Curry, I have a comment and a question. You mentioned early on that you saw this dichotomy that existed between the climate science left and the climate science right, so to speak, for lack of better words, where it's observations versus models. And yeah, I think that a lot of them, and you mentioned that meteorologists not necessarily were, towards the left side of things or the belief side of things. And I think that's true because operational meteorologists, people that forecast from day to day or present weather day to day, such as I did for 30 years, we know the failings of the models, the short-term weather models. We know that they break down, as time goes on. And the fact that there's all this uncertainty that's part of the climate system, there's all this chaos that's part of the climate system, and also as part of the weather system, doesn't seem to be a concern for these folks. They see this as, I believe, more of a linear, it's going to just do the same thing forever and ever. They see a long-term persistence forecast out 100 years or more, and that's not real. And so why they tend to embrace that, I'm not sure. Maybe it's a failing in the way that they were trained. Maybe it's a failing in the way that they are taught to observe things. But one thing I have noted is that the people who tend to be the most in the bag for climate change and, model scenarios tend to be the people that never get out of the office. I remember very early on when I did the surface stations project, I believe it was Dr. Gavin Schmidt that commented, this guy's just going out and taking pictures of these weather stations. That doesn't prove anything. Well, he completely missed the fact that there's this, the microclimate that existed because of the asphalt and the concrete and so forth, and the long wave infrared that it emits at night. I mean, that's basic science, but he just glossed over it. Pictures, what the hell? They don't tell anything. But I do want to ask you, after you published this, how much blowback did you get? Did you get a lot of hate mail?
No, not getting, just a few things. I think, the real climate crowd, Michael Mann et al., they're preparing some sort of a big rebuttal or response, which I look forward to seeing. A lot of the other comments have just been pot shots. Like Richard Toll, he had some specificity to his critique. And after looking through all that, again, I speak for myself, not for everybody else, but I think we will take out one sentence in the report and not change anything else. It's just like a tempest in a teacup. There's not much there. Ben Santer and other people, they haven't made specific criticisms of what we've done. Oh, that paper, somebody said they didn't like it, or somebody misinterpreted what I said, and that's ridiculous. One that got a lot of press was Zeke Hausfather in one of his papers, whatever. There's a diagram in the appendix or like a supplementary information that shows the predictions of emissions from the different, at different times from the different IPCC assessment reports. And it clearly shows that the observations are at the bottom end of the envelope. And we use that. And it's a straightforward comment about that figure, but Hausfather was up in arms. They misrepresent my paper because they didn't include this about what I said. We didn't choose to write about those things. We saw a figure that standalone makes sense that we cited. And so we've misquoted, we've misinterpreted, we've done all this. No, we didn't. We used a graph. The whole of science does this.
The whole of science does this. They look at some particular passage in a paper, and then they talk about that passage or that diagram or whatever, and then they cite that specific thing. What planet is he living on?
Exactly. And they don't realize that, the same data can support multiple narratives, on a range of different topics. So, get over it. So, Yeah, and then there was another. Oh, the other thing is, so this is rich. So the Carbon Brief apparently emailed the author, the first author of every paper that we cited, to ask how, not if, but how we had misrepresented their research. Okay. So several people who got these emails, send it to us. Oh, look what we got. But apparently, it remains to be seen what they come up with. But the ones that the media identified, well, I read one today. Some assistant professor in Norway say we misrepresented her model. We didn't talk about the Norway model. The Norwegian model was included among 30 other models and a couple of graphs based on information, in the official data sources. But she's claiming we misrepresented her model. If you search for NorESM, which is her model, you won't even find that word in our text. So they're claiming stuff that we didn't do.
Yeah. Well, Judy, let me take a second here for the benefit of our audience, because there's a story, I'm sure you've probably seen it, from the French wire service AFP, that's been hitting a lot of wires. And it says, the headline here says, scientists slam U.S. energy paper for misusing climate data. And it actually mentions at least one of the scientists you've already mentioned here. I'll read a little bit from it for the audience. And I really want to give you a chance to debunk, well, not debunk it, but respond to it in the way that it needs to be responded. It says here, top scientists told AFP Thursday that their research cited in a flagship climate report by the Department of Energy was misused to downplay the role of human activity in global warming. It completely misrepresents my work, Benjamin Santer, atmospheric scientist, an honorary professor in the School of Environmental Sciences at the University of East Anglia in Britain, told AFP. I would remind our audience that I believe East Anglia was ground zero for ClimateGate, which was for the suppression and the destruction and blacklisting anyone who countered them. All right, continuing. Santer said a section of the report on quote unquote stratospheric cooling contradicted his findings while citing his research on climate fingerprinting, another quote, a scientific method that seeks to separate human and natural climate change as evidence for its analysis. And it goes on here to say AFP and other media, including Notice, a U.S. digital news website affiliated with the nonprofit Al-Britain Journalism Institute, they claim to have found inaccurate citations, flawed analysis, and editorial errors across the document. So that story is out there. It's on the wires. It's an international story, Judy. And I just want to mention to the audience, the Al-Britain Journalism Institute is funded by the guy who funds Politico, which also owns E&E News, which are both left-wing magazines that are paid specifically to push a climate alarmist narrative. So with all that in the background, Judy, if you could have some response.
Okay. The DOE and the Climate Working Group, we all agree that this should not be mediated through the media. Okay, the DOE is setting up, and it's supposed to go live today, a comment portal where people can submit their comments, okay, which will be sent to the committee to respond to. Some of these comments may result in changes to the report. Others will be responded to in a way where we don't think the response in the report is appropriate, but we will address the comments, and we will do it in a systematic and organized way where people, what would we respond to, in what Ben Santer said? I don't recall that we mentioned his optimal fingerprinting, him in the context of optimal fingerprinting at all. Things that just don't make sense until somebody puts through, it says, page 37, paragraph 3, this particular statement, is incorrect because, and here's the documentation for why we think it's incorrect. Or maybe higher level comments like the author should also have included such and such. These are comments that we can respond to, but these vague allegation. Like I said, Richard Toll laid out in a Substack post what he was concerned about. And he has a minor point, and I anticipate that we will delete one sentence in our report as a result of this. But the other ones are just vague smears, or just people being petty, or they would have liked us, if we're going to reference their paper, they would have liked us to make a different point. like Zeke Housefather. Well, no, that's not the point we're making. But we do think that your graph is particularly informative, and we're going to use that as part of our narrative. So, I think it's important for people to submit their comments to the DOE portal. If serious comments via email, people don't want to submit them to the portal, we will submit them to the portal and deal with them in a formal way according to the DOE procedures. So there's a process.
No, I think a lot of the, sorry. I think a lot of the visceral reactions we're getting from people like Ben Santer and Zeke Housefather are due to the fact that they have always been on the defense or on the offensive. They've always been the ones, leading the charge. Now they're on the defensive and they don't know how to act. They're totally befuddled. And so they just sputter out these, things without any basis because they're just not prepared to be on the defensive.
Okay.
And I think a lot of the blowback, to the extent that there's blowback, is it's not scientific. It's a lot of ad hominem. It's attacks on character. It's attacks on political points of view. It appeals to numbers, but it doesn't have anything to do with science, which is driven by data. And if you can't attack the argument, you attack the people. And that's what a lot of this stuff has been doing. As far as the supposed misuse of various scientists' arguments. Look, I read every week, I read science papers. And quite often, these papers are always hedged. Used to, I never saw such hedging in science documents. But on climate issues, they're hedged. So a paper will show, oh, well, Antarctica is gaining ice for the past 3 years. And they'll say, this is the data. We've gone out, we've done the research. This is the data. It doesn't play into the climate narrative, but it's the data. But then they'll hedge it and they'll say, but we're not saying humans aren't causing dangerous climate change. And so if you were to use their data and say Antarctica has gained ice, they'd say, oh, well, you've implied that we're saying that climate change isn't causing dangerous changes in Antarctica, but that's not what we're saying at all. And how do we know that? Because we hedged at the very end of our paper saying we're not saying that. Don't follow the data, follow what we're told we're supposed to be saying, and that we say at the very end.
Okay, now the media are, the bigger outlets aren't calling us deniers. We're being called skeptics or contrarians. So, I mean, you can't read our bio sketches and, call us crackpots or deniers or anything like that. So the media is the more, I would say, the New York Times kind of things aren't using the denier word. And they're trying to look at real critiques. So the ad homs are there, but they're not as bad as they usually are. They are trying to, and they're going after, trying to find us misrepresenting other scientists' work. I mean, that's the tack that they're taking. And it's not a very rich tactic because it's not specific, and it sounds like there's a lot of scientists out there whining. So they don't quite know how to handle this, which is good because I really don't want this to be adjudicated through the media. The DOE, I hope they get their portal up to date, so people can start submitting comments because otherwise, we'll start to lose credibility and we leave ourselves open to continued whatever. People need to even publicize them, make them public what their comments are rather than just putting them through the portal. Yeah. I don't know if the portal is going to work if people can see the comments in real time or wait until we've responded to them. I don't know at all how it's going to work.
Well, I see that Andrew Dessler at Texas A&M, first he's put together a Google sign-up sheet, and he's asking for people who's willing to join join him in comments about your work. I did see that, and I find it funny that, now, not before, but now it's important to have competing work and views inserted into the record, but that wasn't the case for about, 40 years. But anyway, it's good that it's happening, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. Michael Mann said in some tweets, or whatever you call them on X these days, that there was going to be an organized response. And it seems from realclimate.org that Gavin said there'll be some kind of an organized response. I don't know if that's all the same response. I assume that Bessler would be chiming in with the Real Climate crowd. It's hard to know. But, based on the comments that we got from the DOE scientists, and I said there were a lot of agriculture ones. There was a lot of land and agriculture, comments and global greening and all this kind of stuff. And we did add a number of references, but it didn't really change the punchline in any kind of meaningful way. So that's a part that's been gone over pretty thoroughly. On the physical side, the physical climate side, I mean, I think it's all pretty straightforward. I think there probably will be a lot of discussion about Chapter 11, which is the economics and the social cost of carbon, which really, again, and this is largely written by Ross McKittrick. I contributed some stuff on tipping points and things like that, but that's, I think, the key chapter, relating to the endangerment finding, in all honesty. And I think that will receive a lot of scrutiny. And the whole environmental economics, there's like the old school people who think that climate change is like a very small deal. And then you've got this new generation of climate economics people, that are, really amping up the social cost of carbon and all this kind of stuff. And
well, Judy, you mentioned the endangerment funding. That's a perfect segue, because these things are related. This report is going to, it's rocking people's minds. But I was being a little cheeky in calling it this as a death blow to climate alarmism. But that's maybe one way to look at getting rid of the endangerment finding. You can go to the New York Post. You can see that it's described as Lee Zeldin repealed the holy grail of Obama era emissions finding that has hiked energy costs for years. And so we now begins a 45-day comment period on the endangerment finding, which is the notion, the declaration by Environmental Protection Agency that human carbon dioxide emissions are a pollutant and a harm to humanity and thus must be regulated. After 45 days, that is going to be gone, whether like it or not. And the way you hear those on the climate alarmist side and those who benefit from the green energy system, they don't seem very happy.
Well,
so
the legality, apart from the legality, the legal issues, and apart from, to me, this whole idea of CO2 as a pollutant or whatever is just a lousy basis for energy policy. Personally, I'm all in favor of a 21st century energy transition. Like Anthony said, I'm a big fan of nuclear power. Thorium, is great. Advanced geothermal looks cool for some locations. Let's get on with the energy transition and focus on, first and foremost, cheap, abundant energy, and let's make it clean while we're at it. And we don't need all this CO2 is dangerous and all. We don't need that to really get on with the 21st century energy transition. It just gets in the way of doing sensible things because of the so-called urgency, of meeting all these targets. Oh, well, the only thing we have time to do is wind and solar. So we went down this rabbit hole, for 2 decades that is, I think solar especially rooftop solar, will survive, and there may be new solar technologies coming down the pike. But at least the current wind technologies, I don't see how that makes any sense at all. And I think 20, 30 years from now, we're not going to see, wind power will just be a niche kind of power supply. It won't be any big deal. I mean, that's just my idea.
I guess I hate to disagree with you, Judy, and I don't have much time, but I want to say this. Everyone talks about the energy transition we need to make, the energy, as if there's a global God that says, I know what sources of energy you should be using, and we need to move to that. Maybe in 2050, maybe. I don't believe in that. I believe markets should dictate energy policy. What's cheap and reliable should stay online until we discover, and markets will most likely be the things that discover it.
Sure, but we need
until we discover things that are as cheap and reliable.
Okay, we need new technology.
I think we hadn't gone down the nuclear road we did. I like thorium, but it's not the case that a new nuclear plant is cheaper than a reliable coal plant or natural gas plant. It's not.
Okay, right now, but I think over the course of the 21st century, I think we should transition because we're going to need orders and orders of magnitude more energy. Okay.
And when markets call for it, then yeah.
But I think we should.
The idea that we have to do it on some timeline.
No, I agree. I think over the course of the 21st century is a reasonable time period, not by 2030, 2050, whatever. But we need R&D, and we're going to need, apart from issues of energy poverty, which we need to address. There's, blockchain and AI and data centers and all this kind of, it's going to be exploding. The need for energy, it's just going to be exploding. And, how should we try to meet that need? And we should meet it with, we should work on new technologies that reduce the land footprint and the environmental footprint, of our energy system. So I think that's a legitimate rationale for working towards a transition over the 21st century. So
Anthony, go ahead. You had something?
I want to point out that all these other arguments aside about the endangerment finding, nothing has changed since it has been put together. For example, I want to show you this graph here. As far as we've seen this, that carbon dioxide continues to go up in the atmosphere, no matter what. And so while the U.S. has been able to reduce its annual carbon dioxide emissions, maybe partly due to the endangerment finding, maybe partly due to the fact that we have improved technologies or whatever, but China has not paid any attention to it. India has not paid any attention to it. They've basically given lip service to the whole, 1.5 degrees centigrade Paris Agreement thing. And so what the endangerment finding basically did is it put the U.S. at a disadvantage for growth because China says, screw them, we're going to do what we want. And India pretty much did the same thing. So getting rid of something that is hamstringing us, in my view, is the most important thing. And all these other arguments are just noise.
Yep. Well stated. You might notice that Sterling Burnett has had to leave the stream. He's actually going to go do a radio interview talking about endangerment finding, I believe. But it's pretty crappy of him to get in Judy's face and then beat it, before anybody else could get could give him what for. But oh well, that's the way that goes. I know we have a ton of questions and comments for you, Judy, and I'm sure hopefully you can stick around for a little bit longer and we can go through some of those. But before we do that, I have to mention something, that we have a sponsor of the Climate Realism Show, and we like to do the ad read right before our Q&A. So I'm happy to welcome as a sponsor to the Climate Realism Show, Advisor Metals. If you listen to a lot of conservative shows, you hear a lot of pitches for buying precious metals. Well, we're here to tell you about why we trust Advisor Metals over all of them. It's the man who runs the company, Ira Bershatsky. He is the managing member and owner of Advisor Metals. He has decades of experience in the precious metals business and is the only person in the physical precious metals industry who has the Commodities Futures Trading Commission federal registration. What does that mean for you? It means that everything Ira or a member of his team says to you has to be factual. There's no sales pitch or bait and switch. Ira is held to the highest ethical standards, and there is full transparency. If you want to diversify your investment portfolio and your savings, if you're planning for retirement and are concerned about economic uncertainty, if you want a tangible asset that is easy to buy and sell, you can secure your assets with a wide range of physical precious metals by getting in touch with our friend Ira at Advisor Metals, and Ira will make it extremely easy for you. So please visit climaterealism.show/metals, and you can leave your information for Ira and get started with investing in precious metals and expand your current portfolio. Again, go to climaterealismshow.com/metals. And when you talk to Ira, be sure to let him know who sent you, because as you're helping your financial future, you're also helping support this program. Thank you. All right. We are ready for Q&A. Linnea, take it away.
All right, here we go with that intro for me. Yeah, so I'm going to start with kind of my own question, and this is kind of a broad, open-ended question here, Judy. And that would be, we've seen on the National Climate Assessment over the years, they're pretty dogged about keeping in some pretty bad science, not just on the climate alarmist modeling stuff, but actually the most offensive one, in my opinion, is the $1 billion disasters metric that they just insist on keeping in, even though they know that it double counts weather disasters across different states and that kind of thing. So do you think there's any possibility that if we get another administration in next, that maybe tries to bring a bunch of this stuff back, tries to bring the endangerment finding back, starts publishing alarmist papers or alarmist government reports again? Do you think that this situation will have taught them anything about how to take criticism of their work and to allow for any kind of, real rigorous public debate? Or do you think they're just going to clamp the lid back on right away?
They'll try, but I think it will be harder to maintain credibility. Speaking of the National Climate Assessment, the NCA 4 that was published in 2018, something like that, it was a cut below the IPCC report, but it was a credible document. The NCA 6 published in 2023 was a whole different. It read like a glossy brochure from an environmental advocacy group trying to promote climate action. It was not a real scientific assessment report. It was just an absolute travesty. And there were very few physical climate scientists involved. Most of them were environmental anthropologists or, that kind of expertise. It wasn't like hardcore, what I would call climate science, which doesn't make sense because the U.S. Global Change Research Program, funds a fair amount of basic climate research. So, it was just, to my mind, that most recent one was a travesty. I think, we want to, this whole right-wing science versus left-wing science. I think we've put it out there that there is disagreement, there's multiple perspectives, and I think if they want to be credible, they'll have to take into account some of what we're doing in terms of a more open approach and a more honest approach and dealing with some of the issues that we've raised in our report. You can't push global greening under the rug forever or pretend that there's no mortality from cold events. That, just basic things like that. You just can't ignore these issues any longer, is what I hope is the outcome of this report, and have to, seriously look at data and data quality. And I know this speaks to, Anthony's concern, but, we have to get, these data sets have to be curated. The historical ones, and they have to be cleaned. They have to be carefully dealt with. And John Christie's done a lot of remarkable work in this regards related to extremes. And we need more of that. We need, going forward, we need to collect better observations, and that's pretty important. So I think the point is that data matters, and it's harder. The IPCC 6th assessment report, I think the Working Group 1 report was really one of the better ones in recent decades. But they, clearly, pointed out that there's a lot of problems with the climate models, and they use them only in limited ways. And I think that message needs to get out, that we just can't rely on these climate models for much that's policy relevant. Yes, they're interesting research tools, but they're not. You can't, predict, how the climate in Washington, D.C. is going to play out for the next century. I mean, using these models, you just can't.
Yeah. Well, I have a nice fluff question for you, Judy, to follow up on that one. This is from Ray W., who asks, who is Judy Curry's favorite scientist in history?
Oh, that's hard to know. I would probably go with Aristotle, because he thought holistically about philosophy and science and so many things. And I think it was really his natural philosophy, natural science, that approach is something that I like.
Awesome.
I'll go with Aristotle.
And I'm going to read off this comment this is actually Dr. Willie Soon, a friend of ours and a friend of Climate Realism. He's using, I don't know what this account is that he's using, but he said, let's remember Tim Ball. He will smile from the heavens. This is a truly historic moment in this war on climate science. We are finally able to at least put something on the table. Thank you, Dr. Soon.
Thank you, Willie.
Here's a question from Joe Tripp, who says, question for Dr. Curry. How long will it take for the legacy media and current climate doomsayers in academia to change their tune?
It's tough, because to me, as far as I can tell, the new generation of climate scientists are way worse. They've got all of this entrenched in their head, and all they do is analyze output from climate models. They've lost the basics, physics-based kind of education that, we have. And, so that's a tough one. I think, okay, the funding situation for climate science doesn't look too good under the Trump administration. I think big areas will be cut out. And I think, and I wrote this in my blog post, is we have to get back to basics. Basic science, basic climate dynamics, physics and chemistry-based stuff. And we have to rethink. We have to go back to the drawing board on these models, and have a hierarchy of different types of models. We need to figure out how to couple the atmosphere and the ocean, two chaotic systems in a way that you get something that's realistic, rather than the stuff that we currently have that doesn't work. So the science, it will take a while. And I think a lot of these things are going to dry up. I think even when Trump was elected, a lot of these, the big media outlets had climate desks with 30 journalists, on their staff. And a lot of that is dried up. Okay, so we're losing this dedicated cadre of climate activists, in journalism. And we're going, hopefully, I think the media, I think there's enough honest reporters out there that they want to be on to the next thing, that I think the media will respond more quickly than the scientific community. But like in the weather community, and Anthony can relate to this, a lot of the most exciting stuff going on right now is like in the technologies, small satellite observing technologies, and artificial intelligence coming from the big tech companies. It's not coming from people with PhDs in atmospheric or climate science. So, I think the same thing could happen with the climate field. You'll just see other companies and people coming in from other fields, to take some of this on. So, I think we're at an inflection point, people, the Andrew Desslers and the Michael Manns who want to dig in the trenches and, preserve what was in terms of the political and scientific dynamic. I think they're going to have a tough time, at least for the next 3.5 years. So, these things happen slowly, but if nothing else, we need to promote more honest discourse and having, back in the old days, and Anthony will relate to this, in real climate versus climate, etc., and Anthony versus whatever Joe Rahm's blog was. We used to have this dueling stuff going on, okay, and dueling blogs, and it was sort of exciting, and climate audit versus real climate, and those were sort of exciting days. But in the last decade, all of that has been squashed. Whereas what I would, the climate realists, they can go on and do their thing. And with this new report, this has elevated what I would call, the more data-driven approach to climate science has come back into ascendance. And this is easy for the public to understand. They can look at, the data and those simple plots that John Christie has prepared in chapter 6. They can look at that and understand that. Okay, well, that's the data, and then it's a lot harder to be convinced by some climate model producing some obscure result. So,
I think you're right.
Yeah,
Dr. Curry, the dueling blogs and so forth, that's disappeared. And I think this came within about a year after ClimateGate happened, where they basically decided these guys, these people, they're digging up stuff, and sometimes they're going to expose us and embarrass us. The only thing we can do is ignore them. And I think that's what they've done. They basically stopped engaging because then they were not at risk of being embarrassed, exposed, or have to say anything.
Yeah.
Yep. So I have this good question from Michael Johansson, who says, will the same team be doing other future reports or projects for the government? Or you say?
I'll say yes, but I won't say any more than that.
That's great. Okay. Okay, we have this question from Jim Moses. He says, how much did the SCOTUS 2023 Chevron deference decision play into the EPA being able to throw out endangerment? Thank you.
No idea. I don't pay a heck of a lot of attention to that kind of stuff, frankly. So I'm just more science. Yeah, it's really one for the lawyers. I don't know.
Yeah, I got you. We'll try to have some of our lawyer friends on again soon, and we can go over some of this. They are connected, but I don't think that they, informed the other. I think it's just stuff that has to come down. Let's go. Oh, Ian McMillan asks, Dr. Curry, on what URL can we provide the public comment that you spoke of?
I don't know. It's not up yet. Okay, there's a DOE link in my blog. I assume it will be accessible from that same DOE link. Okay, yeah. I thought it's supposed to go up today, and once I check my email and another 30 minutes, I may find that it's up. But I will, if it is up, I'll post it on Twitter so people can start commenting right away.
Judy, is it the energy.gov/topic/climate? Is that where it might be?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I would expect it to be there.
I'll put that in the scroll below so people can take a picture of it as we go along. Yep.
All right. Here's an interesting question from Polly, who says, is the January 15th, 2022 Hunga Tonga eruption effect now over, or do you guys think it's still having an effect?
It's still there. It's trailing off. It's diminishing, but I think it's still noticeable. I mean, it was huge in 23, 24. It's diminishing. And I think
it takes a long time.
Yeah, take maybe 10 years really for it to totally.
Wow,
we had this massive injection that was super fast, putting all this extra water vapor and stuff into the atmosphere. And now the atmosphere has to go and reach equilibrium again. And it takes a very, very long time for it to do that, because this is not precipitating out. It has to go out through other mechanisms. So it's a very slow thing going on, like Dr. Curry said.
Well, we've got a lot of people, Dr. Curry, who are asking you to predict the future for us here. We've got Paulie, who once again says, is the global cooling expected for the next 30 years due to solar cycles? We've got other questions regarding cooling ahead. Let me pull the one.
Well,
I thought I just saw another one of those.
I'll just make a few comments regarding cooling. I think we're sort of equilibrating after the Hunga Tonga spike. There will be cooling in the near term, and we're still in a negative phase of the PDO and a La Nina dominated kind of period. So I don't think we're going to see, big warming spikes in the future. I think we've got a little bit of cooling relative to the Hunga Tonga spikes, coming the next decade. But who knows? There's always surprises. Hunga Tonga was a huge surprise. So there's always surprises, and how the oceans and everything is reorganizing to accommodate all this. It's hard to know. So I can envision a number of scenarios, but I don't see us in the near term exceeding the 2024 global temperature average.
Awesome. Okay. This is a good question from Scott Clay. Is the drop in planetary reflectivity, so I guess that's the albedo question, understood, and the decrease in cloud cover? But why is it happening, I think is what he means to ask.
Okay. Well, and this is in section 8.5 in the report. I address this issue. It's a pretty fascinating topic. I mean, sorry. Got some background noise there. It appears to be related to cloud cover or cloud properties. Jim Hansen's original idea was that this was related to clouds being less reflected, associated with changes in pollution, but that seems to be a minor effect. It seems to be just the cloud cover, fractional cloud cover, and it seems to be mid-latitude storm track. Exactly what's going on, to me, it seems to be dynamical, associated with modes of internal variability. Jim Hansen thinks it's a cloud feedback related to warming that's causing clouds to reduce. And there was another paper that came out just like 2 weeks ago by Saludis and Rossau, the old ISKIP gang, if you follow that, who were working on the same problem. They also think it's cloud feedback. I think it's natural internal variability, it's just weather. But, we just have to see how it plays out. We don't know yet. But I think it's section 8.5 in the Climate Working Group report. If you're interested in this topic, I encourage you to read it.
Thank you very much. I have this popped up from Chris Nisbet, who says, is there an aspect of mainstream climate science that really grinds Judy's gears, e.g. Model versus observation, adjustment of historical observations, claims that some weather event is unprecedented, blah, blah, blah?
I don't have a topic like that, but it's really the overconfidence issue that people think, on the flimsiest threads of evidence, they make these highly confident statements. Even in the IPCC and the National Climate Assessment, they really don't acknowledge disagreement or uncertainty. They do their best to, present a nice, simple, tidy story. And there's nothing about the climate that's simple and tidy.
Yep, absolutely. Jim, I think you have a question.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of joked earlier in this podcast that I've never seen a report come from the government when it comes to climate that I considered worth reading or based on science. I actually want, Judy, you to address that, or maybe give us your assessment of that. I mean, you're too close to it because you wrote the report, but it just seems remarkable that this is the only report I can recall seeing come from the government when it comes to climate that wasn't just explicitly pushing an alarmist narrative.
Okay.
Is that the case?
Okay. The one report that I think is in a similar vein to this one is the IPCC first assessment report. You know, they laid it out. This is what we know. This is what we don't know. This is where the disagreements are. This is what the uncertainty is. And I thought that was a very credible effort. The second assessment report, the body of the text was fine until you had that kerfuffle with Ben Santer. You know, we've now seen a discernible evidence of warming associated with this not very robust analysis of upper tropospheric temperatures, and they went back and revised the whole document. So the IPCC second assessment report started out okay until it got corrupted. And I will use the word corrupted with a capital C, you know, by politics. But since then, it's just been, you know, they've just been promoting a political agenda. The IPCC sixth assessment report, Working Group 1 report, that is probably the most a relatively decent one. And the fifth assessment report, Working Group 2 report, was pretty good. So occasionally, if you get the right author team, you can get something pretty decent coming out. But in the US, the trend with the National Climate Assessment, NCA 4, the fourth assessment, they actually had a separate volume on the climate science special report. That one, it was sort of IPCC light. You know, it wasn't as good as IPCC, and the IPCC wasn't even that good, but at least they tried. The sixth climate assessment, they didn't even try. It's all about social justice issues. It's, you know, a rather ridiculous effort. So, you know, scientists politicize the science and politicians politicize the science, and scientists scientize policy. So everybody, you know, it's all about power and influence and careerism, and there's all sorts of things in play that are antithetical to science. But this committee, the Climate Working Group, we did our best to really stick to objective science.
And here's a very frequent viewer and also just general friend of climate science here, David Burton, who says, how much effect on albedo and temperature has the IMO 2020 shipping regulations and the sulfur aerosol reduction has that had? Because I think that's something that's fairly widely believed at this point, that there's been some warming because of that.
Yeah, there has been some, but the shipping lanes are pretty narrow in extent. So when you try to get a global number, it's not too big. Again, the amount is, there've been several papers published on that, and I know Jim Hansen has done some stuff on that. But once you average it globally, I mean, locally, I think there's probably some pretty big effects, but globally, you know, not much.
We've got this question from a viewer on X by Rick Recht, who says, if all climate scientists made predictions for the climate in 5 years' time, would any get it right? And should we hold them accountable after those 5 years?
Well, sure, a monkey with a typewriter can, you know, punch something out. But the issue is 5 years is a relatively difficult time scale to predict because it depends on whether you have the balance of El Niños and La Niñas, you know, which are going to dominate any climate signal. And that's pretty unpredictable beyond a couple of years. So that's actually a harder time scale to predict.
Right.
So I wouldn't believe any, you know, people, climate like the UK, Met Office makes, I think every month they put a new 5-year projection out. I haven't even looked at them. I assume they're not useful. You
It's probably a safe assumption.
Not useful. So I think we just have to get over the idea that we can predict climate.
Yeah.
You can put scenarios out there and, say, well, this could happen, that could happen. And we should consider that in our risk management strategies. We can do that. I mean, that's sort of like scenario planning, something I talk about in my book, Climate Uncertainty and Risk, but trying to make a meaningful prediction. I mean, we just don't have it. It's fundamentally unpredictable.
Yeah, people aren't going to like that answer, but that is what I've come to the same kind of conclusion after reading a lot of your work and other climate scientists, is that it's a chaotic system interacting with other chaotic systems, and so trying to predict it out to any decent degree is going to be very difficult. Well, guys, we've gone pretty darn far over our usual amount of time, so I've got this one last question from Albert, who says, what does Dr. Curry think caused the cold of the 70s? Did the strongest and longest La Nina have something to do with it?
It was multi-decadal internal variability. I mean, in the 70s, we had a combination of cold Pacific decadal oscillation, cold Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, and some extreme and long La Ninas. I mean, all of that contributed. There's some arguments that try to say, well, there was a lot of pollution back then. In the 70s, but there was pollution in the 80s and the 60s and the 50s. So I don't know why we can blame pollution on the 70s, but it was probably some sort of a factor. But it's just natural internal variability. Sometimes it happens. You saw that same kind of pattern like 1900, 1905. You saw a very cool period. There's a lot of natural variability in the climate system. We don't need to blame every change on CO2 or anything like that.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Curry.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Judith Curry, for being on the program today. It was an honor again to have you as our guest on the Climate Realism Show, and I'm sure, and I hope we will have you back again in the future. More than 2,000 people tuned in on all the platforms where we stream this show today. So I want to thank the audience for that. I want to thank everybody in the chat where we had some great questions and actually some fantastic commentary running throughout this entire podcast. I want to thank our streaming partners, Junk Science, CFACT, CO2 Coalition, Climate Depot, What's Up With That, and Heartland UK Europe. Thank you, the departed, not dearly departed, just not here right now, Sterling Burnett, and also not here right now, Anthony Watts and Linnea Lucan, our usual panelists here, and our fantastic producer in the background, Andy Singer. And thank you, the audience of this program. We really enjoy ourselves, and we hope to see you again next Friday. Bye-bye.
Thank you.